I'm Howie Silberger. This is Political Hitman. And for those of you who were watching before, I apologize. We had a complete system shutdown. I have no idea why that happened, but it did. So the system kind of shut down right in the middle of the show. It's never happened to me before. I've been doing the show for years, and that's never actually happened before. So I guess live television, radio, this stuff happens. So I apologize. So let's start the show over again. So we'll take it from the top because that's what we do. I'm Howie Silberger. This is Political Hitman here on Israel News Talk Radio. Thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate you being here. It is an honor and a privilege for me to be here with you for another season of the Political Hitman show here on Israel News Talk Radio. If you want to reach me, you could email me. My email address is howie@israelnewstalkradio.com. And you could always check out the website, israelnewstalkradio.com. And don't forget to check out the new Israel News Talk Radio YouTube channel, where you can meet the hosts and do a whole lot more. israelnewstalkradio.com. So we have a lot to talk about this show. A lot's been going on. We're recording this show on Thursday evening. And so earlier today on Thursday, President Donald Trump, the United States President Donald Trump, announced that an agreement had been reached for the complete disarmament of Hamas and every other armed group in Gaza, potentially clearing the way for the terrorist organization to surrender its weapons and give up control of the territory. Trump described the agreement as an historic breakthrough that would prevent Gaza again from being used as a base for attacks against Israel. Hamas, however, has not publicly confirmed the announcement, and it has remained unclear whether the organization has formally signed the agreement or accepted every part of the proposed disarmament plan. The announcement followed months of negotiations between Hamas, Trump's Board of Peace, and mediators from Egypt, Qatar, and Turkey. Two American officials said Hamas had agreed to the terms, although other officials familiar with the talks cautioned that the final approval has not yet been given and that negotiations could still collapse. Now, under the proposed agreement, Hamas and other terrorist organizations would give up their heavy and light weapons over a period of 6 to 8 months. Hamas would also be required to provide detailed maps of its tunnel networks, weapons facilities, and armed depots throughout Gaza. The weapons would not be handed directly to Israel. They would be instead placed in storage under the supervision of the National Committee for the Administration of Gaza, a Palestinian technocratic government backed by the United States and an international stabilization force expected to deploy inside the territory. Control of Gaza would be transferred section by section. Before the new government assumes authority over an area, international officials would verify that Hamas weapons tunnels, production facilities, and military infrastructure have been removed or dismantled. A new Palestinian security force would then be deployed in the areas. Its members would be vetted by Israel's Shin Bet security service before receiving training and authorization to operate. The proposal is based on the principle that Gaza would have one government, one legal system, and one recognized security authority. The agreement would also disarm Palestinian militias that fought Hamas during the war and received weapons or support from Israel. Gazans who voluntarily surrender privately held weapons would be eligible to receive payments through an internationally funded weapons buyback program. Hamas members who surrender their weapons would receive amnesty and be permitted to remain in Gaza. The agreement does not appear to require mass expulsion or prosecution of Hamas members who agree to stop participating in armed activities. In return, Israel will withdraw its forces from the Yellow Line established after October 2025 ceasefire. Israel will also halt targeting killing of Hamas members until it's determined that an individual posed an immediate threat. Any further Israeli withdrawal would lead directly to the disarmament process. Israeli troops would not completely leave Gaza until Hamas had surrendered its weapons and the territory had been verified as demilitarized. Earlier Thursday, an Israeli official said that Israel had rejected the 15-point document being negotiated in Egypt because it did not guarantee the complete removal of every Hamas weapon from Gaza. The official said Israel would not withdraw until Hamas was fully disarmed and the territory completely demilitarized. Sources close to Hamas have said that the organization was prepared to confine and store its heavy weapons under control of Palestinian Authority, but questions remained about light weapons and firearms carried by individual Hamas members. The apparent disagreement may reflect different versions of the agreement or changes made during negotiations. It may also reflect the gap between Trump's announcement of complete disarmament and the details Hamas is prepared to accept. Hamas has resisted disarmament since the ceasefire took place in October 2025. It has argued that it will not surrender its weapons without guarantees that Israel will end its military occupations and withdraw from Gaza. Earlier this month, Hamas announced that it has dissolved its de facto government and was prepared to transfer civilian authority to the Palestinian Technocratic Committee. Israel dismissed the move as an attempt by Hamas to surrender administrative responsibility while keeping its weapons and military power. Egypt, Qatar, and Turkey have placed heavy pressure on Hamas to accept the disarmament agreement. Iran has reportedly urged Hamas to delay signing and continue negotiating. American officials believe Hamas has been weakened by military pressure, a growing financial crisis, and efforts to cut off its remaining sources of funding. The proposed agreement would represent the first time Hamas has accepted a process requiring it to surrender its weapons, dismantle its military infrastructure, and give up security and control of Gaza. Whether that process has actually begun will depend on what Hamas signs, what Israel accepts, and whether the weapons, tunnels, and armed forces Hamas spent nearly 2 decades building are ultimately surrendered. Excuse me if I'm not excited about this deal. Excuse me if I feel that this is a catastrophe. Because it is. We've seen this before. This is not a new plan. Way back in the early 90s, a plan was built to achieve peace in the Middle East. Bill Clinton had the Israeli Prime Minister, Yasser Arafat, the Israeli Foreign Minister, Shimon Peres, I'm sorry, did I call the Israeli Prime Minister Yasser Arafat? I meant Yitzhak Rabin. Yitzhak Rabin, Shimon Peres, and PLO dictator Yasser Arafat, head terrorist. They had him on they had them at the White House, at Camp David, and then at the White House, where they signed the Oslo Agreement. Now, the Oslo Agreement also was a phased agreement of disarming the terrorist group and creating a Palestinian state, which would be given to them in pieces. So you had phase 1 and phase 2 and phase 3, block A, block B, block C, and it would be given to the Palestinian Authority in phases, and that would eventually lead to the creation of an independent Palestinian state. And it didn't work. It led to more blood. It led to an intifada, more bloodshed, and thousands of Jewish deaths and thousands of Arab deaths too. That's what that led to, the Oslo Accords. And this is what this deal is going to lead to. Because American presidents in their second term decide that they want to build their legacy. They want everyone to remember that they found the way to make Middle East peace. They found the solution. They found the magic formula. The problem is that they always work on the same premise. And this is really where the American presidents go wrong and why it never works. The premise that they're working on is that the Palestinians, or the people who call themselves Palestinians, created in 1964, these people are being oppressed by the Israelis and are being stopped from having a state on their land by the Israelis. This is the premise they enter the negotiations with. This is the premise that they start with. But that's not really the source of the conflict. That's not really why the Arabs living in and around Israel and the Israelis are fighting. It has absolutely nothing to do with, it has everything to do with land and absolutely nothing to do with land. This is a religious war, and this is what the United States government and many governments around the world don't want to admit. This is a religious war. It is not a land war. If it was a land war, the Palestinians would have a state already. Israel would have granted them a state. They would have given them land and said, make a state. In fact, they tried to. In fact, they were offered. Yasser Arafat was offered 98% of Judea and Samaria. He was offered all of Gaza, 98% of Judea and Samaria, and Jerusalem as the capital. All he had to do was say, okay, we'll take it, and we'll recognize Israel as a Jewish state. That was it. That was all he had to do. Instead, what did he do? He walked away. Why did he walk away? Because fundamentally, even though the land aspect of the war was solved, there would still be a Jewish state in the Middle East, and that he cannot accept. So he walked away. The reason they can't accept a Jewish state, and we've spoken about this, is because the Quran says that anywhere there was a caliphate, anywhere that there was an Islamic caliphate, that becomes holy Islamic land forever. And there is no one else who could run that land outside of, no non-Islamic government could run that land. And if they do, they're infidels that must be destroyed. Which is why the PLO Charter and the Hamas Charter both called for the annihilation of Israel. The Hamas Charter went even further and called for the annihilation of Jews all around the world. So because this is the premise of the problem isn't so much the land, because land, they have plenty of land. The Arabs have plenty of land in the Middle East. So land's really not the issue here. Because land's not the issue, and the issue is actually a religious problem, a deal like this is not going to work. It is impossible for a deal like this to work. Because it doesn't solve the root problem of the Arabs. The Arabs' root problem. Root problem is the Jews. Has nothing to do with the land. It's the Jews. Now, it's been proven over and over and over again. I could go over 15 peace agreements where land was offered and the Arabs said no. If they really wanted a Palestinian state, before Palestinians even existed, in 1948, they could have accepted the partition plan. And we could go through all of the different agreements over the course of 78 years. And the end result is the Arabs said no to each and every one of them, not because they were being oppressed and they were desperate to get out of oppression, not because they held some principle that Israel has to stand up to and Israel refused to stand up to it, solely because Israel cannot exist in their philosophy, in their religion, in their theology. And since Israel continues to exist after all these peace agreements, they don't work. They'll work. Yasser Arafat said it. He said it in Johannesburg, just after the Oslo Accords. Nelson Mandela was right there in the audience where he said, listen, he said, we are going to, our principles is we lull them into a sense of security and then we attack them and we kill them. This is the goal. So yeah, I'll accept anything, he said, as long as the end goal still is the destruction of the state of Israel. So if that is the goal, the destruction of the state of Israel, making a deal with the devil and giving the devil guns and an army is not going to work. It didn't work the first time. The Palestinian Authority was given a police force. They were given Zone A, Zone B, Zone C. They were given a police force. They took the police force and turned it into a terror force. Sure, they kept the peace, and their guns were used to commit terror attacks. The international force, the UN, was there watching this. And the UN observers went to bed at 8 o'clock at night so they wouldn't have to stop Arab terrorists from committing terror attacks. It's a total farce. The only solution to the problem in the Middle East, and I know a lot of people don't agree with me on this, but this is the truth. The only solution to the problems in the Middle East, the only solution to the Arab-Israel conflict, and I've been saying this for years, is to build a wall of separation between them and completely separate the two people. The Jews live on one side of the wall, the Arabs live on the other side of the wall, and nobody crosses through. Not for work, not for pleasure, not for business. Nobody passes through. And the Jews live amongst each other and they fight amongst each other, and the Arabs live amongst each other and fight amongst each other. And that's the only way to achieve peace in the Middle East. And even that won't achieve peace because the Islamic law says that it can't. Islamic law says that as long as there's a Jewish state in the Middle East, it has to be destroyed. So even if you separate and you create a wall and you create two totally separate countries living next to each other, they will still find a way to attack the Jews because the Jews can't be there. They're infidels. They have to be destroyed. I hate to break it to you, but Trump's deal will not work and his legacy will not be Middle East peace. That is 100%. Now, they're going to try. Of course, they're going to try because why not? Let's put more lives in danger. Why not? Jewish life is cheap. Jewish blood runs free. So why not? Let's just try it. Look, who cares about a couple of dead Jews? That's really the philosophy here. And that's really, unfortunately, what's going to happen. We saw it before. It's not new. This is not a new scenario. And this is the importance of learning from history. This is the importance of understanding history and learning from history, where you can look back and say, hey, we did this before, and we saw the failures. How are we going to fix these failures? And nobody's doing that. At least everything I've read today, everything I've heard today about this deal, nobody's doing that, saying, hey, look at the Oslo Accords. That didn't work. It's almost the same structure. It didn't work. So let's figure out why that didn't work and try to make this work. The difference between the Oslo Accords and the PLO and Hamas is October 7th. The PLO committed terror attacks against Jews and against Americans, against French citizens for years and years and years. The PLO was a terrible organization that killed many, many people. But they never committed a mass casualty event to the scope of what Hamas did on October 7th. And I know a lot of people say, stop talking about October 7th. I don't care. October 7th was a game changer. The reason it was a game changer is, I'll explain it to you. I'll explain to you why it was a game changer. I'll explain to you the reason. October 7th was a game changer because it was a concerted effort to kill civilians. You could argue that a terror attack was targeting soldiers that were standing on the side of the road, soldiers riding on a bus, and civilians were collateral damage. You can make that argument. And lefties tend to make that argument. They weren't going after, they walked into a pizza parlor. Every adult male in that pizza parlor was an Israeli soldier. So they were all targets. You can make that argument, and it's not a legitimate argument, but it's an argument. Fine. October 7th, there's no argument for. It wasn't resistance because there was nobody oppressing them. Jews had left Gaza. Every single Jewish soul had left Gaza. Every single Jewish body, every Jewish bone, every Jewish building, every Jewish dog, every Jewish chicken left Gaza in 2006. The attacks on the southern communities of Israel on October 7th was a planned attack on a civilian population. It was a war crime. And I know not too many people are calling it a war crime. It was a war crime. Nobody's being held accountable for this war crime, that's for sure. But it was a war crime against Jews. People were raped. They were murdered. Bodies were raped. Children were beheaded. Babies were baked in ovens in front of their mothers. That's not resistance. I had the unfortunate pleasure, and it wasn't a pleasure at all, of watching the uncut video of the October 7th attacks. The uncensored video. Many media people were invited to see this at Israeli consulates around the world, and I was unfortunately one of those media people who were chosen to go and see this video. And the publicly released stuff that you see from October 7th is rated G compared to the stuff that's on this video. I wish that the Israeli government would release it to the world to see how barbaric the Hamas members were when they came into these towns and these little settlements and murdered the Jews that were living there. I wish the Israeli government would prove to the world that this was not an act of resistance. This was not an attack on the Israeli military or the Israeli government. This was the slaughter, the annihilation, and the attempted genocide of a people. The people who came into Gaza, the terrorists who came into Gaza, and even calling them a terrorist is a compliment to them because they're worse than terrorists. The monsters that came into Gaza, and I'm insulting monsters, that's how bad it was, came in with the intention of murdering men, women, and children, innocent men, women, and children. A civilian population. Their intention, their sole intention, was to kill as many Jews as possible. And we know this from the phone calls and from the live streams that they themselves recorded. One of them calling his mother and saying, hey, I killed 10 Jews today. And mother saying, oh, you're so great. Keep up the good work. He says, yeah, I'm calling you from one of the dead woman's phones. And the mother saying, wow, I'm so proud of you, son. This is the kind of monsters that came in from Gaza. So empathy, I don't have. I can't have. And faith that this kind of peace agreement is going to work, I don't have either. I keep thinking back to some of the survivors, some of the hostages that came back alive, who told the horrific story of how they were brought into Gaza. The Gazans were standing on the side of the streets beating them up. Children telling that story, 12-year-olds, 10-year-olds. And I watched those videos, and you can watch them. They're on YouTube. You can look them up. Look up the videos of the survivors' testimonies and what happened to them when they went into Gaza. People people who are taken hostage and being kept in people's houses, doctors and teachers' houses, and being tortured there. Just listen to the words of the survivors. And it's amazing where everyone's, this entire woke movement, this entire lefty movement is always into, we believe, we listen. Remember the Me Too? You tell us your story. We believe you. We believe you. We believe you. And the belief is always there until the Jews tell their story. And then suddenly you're making it up. It's propaganda. It's AI. The Jews are never believed. And there's no reason not to believe the survivors, the people who survived being held hostage in Gaza. There's no reason not to believe their stories. And when we listen to their stories and we listen to a child tell the story on how he was raped and how he was beaten and how he thought he was going to die. That's the difference between the PLO and Hamas. And that's why, where the PLO might have had a chance of creating something that would have been livable for the state of Israel, there's no chance with Hamas. There's no chance with the people of Gaza. And I hate to say it. I hate to say it because it's a population, a big population in Gaza, and I hate to say that I don't have faith that there's anybody there that is willing to live side by side in peace with Israel. I don't think that we could trust anybody living in Gaza. I don't think they're trustworthy. Hundreds of them came through that gate on October 7th with the sole intention of murdering Jews. They knew they weren't going to destroy Israel. There was no chance of them destroying Israel. There was no chance of them toppling the Israeli government on October 7th. They knew their mission was just to come in and kill as many Jews as they can, bring back as many hostages as they can. It was leverage. Putting that aside, and we should never put it aside, but putting that aside for a second, do you think for even a second that when Hamas is dismantled, another radical group's not going to come up and replace it? That has been the history of the Middle East. That has been the history of Gaza. Destroy one leader, another one jumps up into his place. Kill another one jumps up. Do you think that destroying the organization is not going to pop up another organization that's even worse than the one we currently have? We saw with the PLO, didn't we? The PLO was corrupt. They were stealing money from the population of Judea, the Arab population of Judea, Samaria, and Gaza. And the people living there were sick and tired of the Palestinian Liberation Organization and the corruptness of them. So they went to a general election. This was more than 20 years ago. They went to a general election and they elected Hamas as their government. Now, that wasn't only in Gaza, as the narrative likes to tell you now. It was the entire Arab population that voted in that election that was supervised by Jimmy Carter. So it was democratic for sure. If Jimmy Carter was there, it had to have been democratic, right? Everybody in the entire territories of Judea, Samaria, and Gaza, all the Arabs voted for Hamas. They wanted Hamas to be their leaders. They voted in a terror organization. Fine. You get what you sow. You elect a terror organization, then you live under the leadership of a terror organization. It was Israel and the United States that decided that they didn't want Hamas in power, that they didn't accept the results of that election. I remember Jimmy Carter going crazy at the time. And they started pushing the PLO to take over the government in Judea and Samaria, in Israel proper. And they pushed Hamas into Gaza. Now, this is, again, why history is important to understand and history is important to remember. When Hamas went into Gaza, they were legitimately elected government of all of Judea, Samaria, and Gaza, of the Palestinian Authority. They were the Palestinian Authority, legally. When they went into Gaza, the PLO in Gaza tried to kill them. They put in guns, and they were helped by the Israelis and the Americans, and they were there to kill Hamas. And they started doing that. They started a civil war in Gaza, and they tried to kill Hamas, but Hamas was stronger than them, and Hamas ended up taking over the Gaza Strip, which led to the situation that we're in today. So let's be honest here. And we can't be anything more than honest. Hamas had taken over the Gaza Strip, and they ruled the Gaza Strip as an Islamic caliphate. They ruled the Gaza Strip as if they were Islamic warlords, like every other Islamic country in the Middle East. And they stole all the aid money, and they built terror tunnels. And they built launch pads to launch attacks into Israel, and tunnels to attack and kill innocent men, women, and children. And they launched thousands and thousands of missiles into civilian populations in southern Israel. Thousands, tens of thousands of missiles into civilian populations in southern Israel. And they did that for over a decade, and the entire world said nothing. There were no condemnations. There were no stop attacking innocent population. There were no, this is a war crime. Every single missile launched into a civilian population is a war crime under the Geneva Convention. Yet all these people yelling about the Geneva Convention never said a word when towns like Sderot were being bombarded with missiles coming in from Gaza. Not a word. Nobody's calling for the prosecution of the leaders of Hamas for committing tens of thousands of war crimes, or the leaders of Yemen, or the leaders of or the Houthis, or Iran, who launched missiles indiscriminately into civilian populations. But boy, did the world go crazy when Israel decided to defend itself after October 7th. Boy, did the world go crazy calling Israel war criminals, accusing Israel and Bibi Netanyahu of genocide when there is no genocide going on. Let's be honest again, because it's important to be honest. If Israel wanted to commit a genocide in Gaza, it would have been done in the first 15 minutes of the war after October 7th. Israel has enough guns, enough bombs, enough planes, and enough soldiers to go in and kill every last man, woman, and child in Gaza. And they would have done it in 15 minutes, or 20 minutes. They just carpet bombed the entire Gaza Strip. It's not that big. And they would have done it in just a few minutes after October 7th, if that was their intention. This argument that Israel is a genocidal state is ludicrous and borders on ridiculous. It's almost as ridiculous as calling Israel an apartheid state. Not quite, but almost as ridiculous. But yet, it just keeps getting repeated over and over again. And anybody who opposes it, anybody who says, you're crazy, that's not what genocide is, they're canceled. They're thrown off whatever network they're on. They're told to go home. Because if you don't conform and don't Follow what everybody else is saying. And you're done. I urge everybody watching and listening to this show, I urge you to listen to what the politicians are saying, to do research, proper research on history, and understand the situation, and understand that this is a religious war, that this is not a land war, and that a land for peace option is not the solution here. Once we understand that, and once we approach the war and the conflict through the lens of religious zealotry, then maybe, just maybe, a solution may be found. Until then, we're just spinning our wheels. And if Israel goes ahead and accepts this deal that Donald Trump has brokered through his board of peace, if Israel goes ahead and accepts this, then they're just putting more and more Jewish lives in danger. I urge you, and I urge every Israeli, and I urge the Israeli governments to remember the Oslo Accords and to act appropriately. I pray for the state of Israel. I pray for the survival of the Jewish people. I pray for the Jews of Israel. I'm Howie Silberger. This is Political Hitman on Israel News Talk Radio. Thank you so much for joining me. I will see you again next show, right here on IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com. Check out the website, IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com, and check out their YouTube channel, Israel News Talk Radio.